Let's pick things up there for tonight's Dateline Defense. Joining me, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer. He's a CIA-trained senior intelligence operations officer, best-selling author, and senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research.
Hey, Morris.
Tony, let's start with Russia.
Sure.
Their warplanes fired on militant positions in two Syrian provinces, the Islamic State in Aleppo and al-Nusra in Idlib. Talk about those two groups. What's the difference?
Well, one is al-Qaeda-centric and one is ISIS, and I think what we're seeing here is the Russians doing what they said they were going to do, which is essentially stabilize the area that President Assad, their ally, the president of Syria, still controls. And what they're going to do here is go both ways. So remember, some of the resources we put forth to support the destabilization of the Assad regime actually went off and joined the al-Nusra front, which are essentially al-Qaeda. So it's ironic here that CIA has been very upset with Russia by the fact that some of the folks we trained have been targeted in this Russian effort. But the bottom line is Russia's going to do what they think is necessary to stabilize the Assad regime, at least for now.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he will start cooperating with the French military on operations in Syria. Is that a good thing, Tony?
It is for the limited scope in which we're talking here. Again, Morris, we're talking about, I think everybody recognizes at this point, that Syria, the destabilization of Syria, the chaos caused by ISIS is the real issue. That's causing the refugee crisis, that's causing any number of secondary effects which are hugely bad to the region. So the first thing we must all do is defeat ISIS and bring some level of governance back to the region. Terrorists are drawn to the lack of governance. Essentially, ungoverned space draw terrorists. It becomes a petri dish for what we're seeing now. So in a limited scope, the Russians working with the French and vice versa is good. The question becomes obviously what happens after ISIS is defeated, which is something we still don't know what it will be like.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State John Kerry is in France. He says a ceasefire in Syria could only be weeks away. At the same time, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov criticized U.S. policy in Syria. He called it contradictory and confusing. Is he right?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if you could ask any particular political pundit who follows this what the strategy or what the policy is. There's hard to call a ceasefire on something that you can't control.
Yeah, why does Kerry think, why would he even say that?
Because it's not even possible. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where Kerry and other folks in the senior level of the Obama administration have essentially put forth a policy of wishful thinking. It was like over Ben Rhodes talking over the weekend about this so-called process to screen refugees. There's no process.
Right.
So I think what we need to understand here is that this administration is grasping at straws, trying to find some path forward, while those around them act. The Russians are acting, the French are acting, the British are acting. We're not. And I think that's what we're seeing here is John Kerry trying to come up with some idea of something to say when actually we're not doing much of anything at all.
A ceasefire sounds commendable, but I can't imagine it was going to happen anytime
Not
soon.
realistic.
All right, Tony, Canada has a new prime minister. Justin Trudeau says he will increase the number of military trainers in northern Iraq, but plans to pull out his fighter jets. Now, that's despite the Paris attacks. Does this make any difference in the fight against ISIS?
Well, it does. I mean, the Canadians have a large role to play with us. They're one of the Five Eyes. They're one of our closest allies. And I think the Canadians are going to figure out their path forward after they kind of assess their own internal priorities. I don't like the idea of Canada pulling out airwise, but the idea of having ground components still supporting us is good. It's not great, but it's good. And I think we all recognize, Morris, that we're going to have a ground component, boots on the ground at some point, working to retake the land lost to ISIS. So,
but whose boots?
Well,
that's been the big
it's going to be foreign boots with a few advisors like the Canadians, like us, helping shape that. So I think this is where the Canadians can be helpful. I've worked with their special operations forces. The Canadians are superior. So I don't consider this completely a defeat or the Canadians walking out. I think they're reconfiguring for purposes of their own purpose.
Why can't the people in country that are already there be motivated? Is part of the issue a Muslim doesn't want to kill another Muslim regardless if it's Sunni, Shia, or all these other different tribes? No,
I think it's more complex than that, Morris. Part of it is that there's a distrust. There's a distrust of us. The Shia don't trust the Sunni don't trust the Shia. The Shia are ostensibly led and allied with the Iranians. That's a huge issue. The Sunni are essentially those which are being pushed aside. they're being pushed aside is what resulted in ISIS being able to leverage much of their support and maintain it. So that's why you have to have a Sunni element, such as the Jordanians, Egyptians, and Saudi Arabians, who are all Sunni, coming in to retake that space. Otherwise, you're going to not have any sort of peace between those two sides. Frankly, you may not even be setting up peace. You're setting up at least equal parts of pressure that can kind of countervail each other. At this point in time, we don't even have that.
Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Thanks, Tony.
All right, thank you.